Joy Behar calls her a 10. I mean, how dare she objectify a woman with a rating system, but it's such a typical thing from a 1.5.
She's young, but she's wise beyond her years, and she has access to the president, which is something someone didn't have.
Hey, I'm your host, Jessica, and let's just say today's tea is simmering hot enough to make you blush. Chaos on daytime TV isn't new, but this time it spiraled out of control the second Caroline Leavitt walked into the spotlight. With one no-nonsense move, she rattled the panel of The View so hard they were
because she said something yesterday that really pissed me off. And that was, she said, there will be no wokeness here.
Oh, yeah.
Let me explain something to you, because without that wokeness, you might not have that job.
left scrambling to defend themselves. If you've been waiting to see someone finally turn the tables on mainstream media darlings, brace yourself, because this showdown changed the game. Before we dive into the heated confrontation, let's talk about how Caroline Levitt ended up in the eye of the storm. She's the youngest press secretary to ever step foot in the White House, handpicked by Donald Trump after he returned to office. In a political world dominated by familiar faces and recycled rhetoric, Caroline burst onto the scene with razor-sharp commentary and a knack for calling out hypocrisy on the spot. Her appointment was anything but quiet. The moment her name was announced, Democrats and media figures sprang into action, trying to undermine her credibility. They never expected a 20-something newcomer to rattle their established power structure, yet that's exactly what happened. And The View was first in line, ready to paint her as clueless and unqualified. But as you'll see, Caroline had no intention of standing by silently. If there's one thing The View is known for, it's the constant swirl of opinion. Joy Behar, a self-proclaimed feminist, typically leads the charge by championing women's rights, or so she claims. But the moment Caroline appeared on her radar, Joy reduced her to a number on some imaginary scale, calling her a 10, as though Caroline's role and success begin and end with her looks. It was a bizarre and telling moment. How can someone who preaches female empowerment sink to objectifying another woman? Caroline didn't let it slide. She answered with razor-sharp wit, pointing out that The View is totally out of touch with average Americans. No euphemisms, no sugarcoating. She basically told them to get real, sparking both admiration and outrage online. But as outrageous as Joy's comment was, the real shocker came when conservative commentator Greg Gutfeld cheekily fired back. He took Joy's rating system and turned it on her, implying that if Caroline is a 10, maybe certain hosts on The View wouldn't fare so well on the same scale. It was a snappy remark that went viral in seconds. Suddenly, Joy, who loves scolding others, was on the defensive. While Joy was busy juggling backlash, Whoopi Goldberg stepped in to shift the narrative. She claimed that Caroline's attitude was a sign of intolerance. Then she launched into a lecture on wokeness, mixing up genuine civil rights milestones with trendy buzzwords. Caroline saw right through it. She calmly pointed out that championing civil rights is not the same as pushing modern woke ideologies, where sometimes the loudest voice wins and everyone else is labeled ignorant. Instead of bridging a gap, Whoopi's speech blurred the lines even more, equating Caroline's criticism of performative activism with rejecting civil rights altogether. It was a classic deflection tactic. But Caroline didn't budge. She noted that if Whoopi genuinely stood for women's progress, she would have called out Joy's degrading remarks. That never happened. Instead, Whoopi tried to spin the conversation into a race and gender debate, sidestepping the real issue: hypocrisy in mainstream media. Viewers immediately picked up on it, sparking a social media storm over where The View's priorities truly lie. The biggest gut punch to The View came when Caroline dropped a bombshell about how press briefings would be handled going forward. For decades, the same elite voices dominated the front row in the White House press room, often shaping the narrative to fit a single perspective. Caroline flipped that script in an instant. She announced plans to designate 2 front-row seats as new media seats, giving independent journalists and rising outlets a chance to ask questions. And if that wasn't enough to shake up the establishment, she also restored passes for over 400 reporters who had been shoved aside during the previous administration. The View hosts were appalled, claiming this would open the door to unvetted voices spouting nonsense. But many Americans saw it differently. They saw a young press secretary giving fresh perspectives a platform, something they'd been demanding for years. For The View, it was a frightening glimpse of a future where they no longer monopolized the conversation, and it fueled their outrage throughout the rest of the show. If you thought the tension was high already, it went stratospheric when Caroline confronted The View over bizarre accusations they made about Elon Musk. The panel insinuated that Musk might have faced some kind of assassination attempt because of his outspoken ways, a claim with little evidence, but plenty of dramatics. Caroline called this out as the height of hypocrisy. How could The View brand conservatives, conspiracy theorists, yet push wild and unverified claims of their own? As she reminded them, mainstream outlets used to maintain rigorous standards, but now seem eager to latch onto any headline that generates clicks, even if it's unsubstantiated. Whoopi and Joy scrambled to justify their speculation, stumbling over their own words. Caroline seized the opportunity to hammer home a point many viewers had been waiting to hear. Accountability is a two-way street. You can't demand it from conservatives while spouting rumors just because they fit a certain narrative. Desperate to corner Caroline, the hosts shifted the spotlight to one of the most heated topics in the country, migration. They fired off statistics and asked leading questions, clearly hoping to trip her up on camera. But Caroline was unfazed. She pointed out that anyone crossing the border illegally is, by definition, breaking the law. Instead of letting them spin it into a debate on compassion, she stuck to the simple fact that part of the White House's responsibility is to enforce existing laws. If that upsets The View or the progressive wing, so be it. The attempt to trap Caroline not only failed, it backfired. She calmly reiterated the administration's stance that protecting law-abiding citizens is a priority, and that those who want to enter the country should do so legally. Viewers at home saw a composed, direct press secretary who refused to be bullied. Meanwhile, the hosts appeared rattled, quickly switching topics to avoid a deeper conversation. By this point, the tension in the studio was palpable. The hosts had tried personal attacks, race baiting, and policy gotchas, all to no avail. Caroline's final move was to highlight the real shift happening. Americans no longer trust legacy media as blindly as they once did. She laid out how platforms like The View have long enjoyed the freedom to push narratives without serious pushback. But in today's media landscape, alternative voices gain traction quickly, and fact-checking happens in real time. The meltdown on The View is a microcosm of what's happening across mainstream outlets. They're losing the ability to dictate the story. Caroline made it clear, if these established programs won't adapt to honest reporting and balanced coverage, they'll be left behind. And that, more than anything, appeared to terrify the panel. They thrive on controlling the conversation. Now, they face an era of accountability where every slanted remark can be publicly challenged. In a world where talking heads often go unchecked, Caroline Leavitt tore through The View's carefully curated facade in just one episode. She exposed how easily they dismiss real achievements, ignore hypocrisy, and pivot to emotional buzzwords when confronted by a strong, prepared opponent. But this is more than a single confrontation. It's a snapshot of legacy media's uncertain future. As younger, sharper voices step forward and new platforms rise, viewers aren't willing to be spoon-fed questionable narratives anymore. The question is, can traditional outlets adapt, or will they cling to the same tactics until their audience slips away for good? What do you think? Is mainstream media crumbling under the weight of its own biases, or will shows like The View find a way to maintain their influence? Share your thoughts, and if you want more deep dives into stories that shake up the status quo, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. The next chapter in this media battle is just around the corner, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Still catching your breath from that tea and craving more? Drop a like, then hit subscribe to Tea Sesh with Jessica, your favorite host, so you're first in line for every sip. With more drama on the horizon, you definitely don't want to get left behind.